There he
Brian,
is.
it's
What's
Paul
up,
Riley
Brian?
with Joe and Steve
Hey, guys.
and JetCast. Thanks so much for taking some time out to join us tonight.
No
What's up,
problem.
Josh?
How are you guys?
Very good, and it's
Good.
timely for a few reasons. Number one, I read your story today.
Yeah.
You gave us every pick, and I know people want to go through that with you, but I want to start with something else because I'll forget if I don't because I'm old. You had told us something that was very almost Nostradamus back in October. You were in a space, and people were talking about Mekhi Becton, and you just very casually said the coaches aren't going to want him back.
Yeah.
And you were right. But people on these Twitter spaces, Brian, have been suggesting that now there's obviously no market for Mekhi Becton and that the Jets need a backup at the tackle position. Do you think there is any, and I'm not advocating it at all, I'm just suggesting.
Yeah, and I hear you.
Do you think there's any chance that those two get married again for a short-term, little one-year marriage?
Look, I think I probably said this before on Spaces. I never say never to anything, right?
Okay.
Like, things happen, but I think both sides really want something new. I think both sides. I think Mekhi loved playing with Aaron. I think he liked that part, but I think he knows he needs to change the scenery. I think the Jets want to move on from Mekhi. Yeah, it's kind of interesting because he's still out there, and we're in middle of April, so he's clearly gonna have to sign a 1-year prove-it deal wherever he goes. But I'd be surprised if that ended up with the Jets. But yeah, I mean, the longer he's out there, I guess the more the chance there is because the price keeps coming down, and at some point maybe they say, all right, let's just do it. But he was not a favorite of the coaching staff, so I think it's probably like a 5% chance maybe that he'd be back or something like that, less than 10%.
Kaz, who do you think signs first, Donovan Smith or Mekhi Becton?
Oh, man, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I thought Mekhi would get signed. I didn't think he was going to get big money or anything, but I thought he'd be signed by now because of his age and his size, and he's not that far removed from being the number 11 pick in the draft. So I thought somebody out there would, maybe like him in the draft. So, I'm not sure who signs first, but I would think Mekhi would get something done here right after the draft. I think, when teams after the draft kind of reassess where they're at, and maybe somebody thought they would get a tackle, they don't get a tackle, and they bring him in. But now he's going to be a depth piece probably wherever he is. I have to imagine everyone knows who their starting tackles are at this point, or they're figuring they're going to draft one in the first round.
Joe, if you have something for Brian, I have one more. Then we're going to turn it to hands. Yeah. Jason, you're next. And then please, anyone who wants to ask a question, let us know. Go ahead, Joe.
What's up,
Hey,
Kaz?
Joe, how are you?
Good, man. Quick question. Is there any it's just coincidence, but the fact that, and I know people are like, oh, just because he came in the same day, Aaron Rodgers came into his first day yesterday. Was it yesterday or Monday?
Yeah.
When he came Monday, that Brock Bowers was there for a visit.
Yeah.
I mean, do you put any?
I saw. I think Schefter might have kind of like gave that a little air. I don't think so, Joe. Usually the way these kind of visits work, it's based on the player's schedule more than anything else. Like when the players can come, and the Jets might have wanted to wait till after his pro day. I don't think that. I wouldn't read into that like, oh my gosh, he's the guy because Aaron Rodgers was there. I wouldn't be shocked if he didn't even see Aaron Rodgers. Like it might have been a different part of the day. So I don't read into that too much. I think that was probably just a coincidence.
I mean, now you've been doing this. You've been covering the Jets. How many years now? Total
14
years. 14 years. I mean, and we had this conversation the last time, and you said, and I thought, the last couple of times where the day of the draft, things were, guys would come on the radio and say the Jets are taking this guy.
Yeah.
That's the word is they're taking this guy. I mean, do you get like sometimes talking to a lot of people, will you get a vibe like close to the draft that like where a gut say I have a feeling they're going with Becton or they're going with this guy.
The hard part, Joe, is when they're picking. Like if they're picking in the top 3, like those years, absolutely, you get an idea, right? Because like Zach Wilson, somebody told me that in January that they were taking Zach Wilson, not somebody with the Jets. It's not the Jets don't want anyone to know. It's people outside the Jets, but they might hear something. Darnold, I kind of got caught wind of like the day before the draft, I want to say, like it started circulating that the Browns were going to take Baker, and that was like the big thing was like, okay, they're going to take Baker, the Giants are going to take Saquon, the Jets take Sam. It gets a lot harder when you're down at 10 because you don't know what's going to happen before 10, right? Like and like the Becton year, I had no idea because you didn't know. You knew it was one of the 4 tackles, but you had no idea who was going to get drafted. And Andrew Thomas, frankly, was a shock. That was a shocker at 4. We didn't. Nobody had him as the number 1 tackle that year. He's worked out well for the Giants, but you didn't know who was going to be there. And even I remember, I didn't know they would take Becton over Wirfs at that point either. So it's hard when it gets past a certain point. But there are some years, Joe, where you hear stuff like I remember the Daniel Jones year. I remember hearing the Giants love Daniel Jones, but sometimes people are wrong too. There's years where you hear stuff and it doesn't come to fruition.
But you knew. I remember I told you last time.
Pryor.
I can still remember you going to Joe and Evan saying that the Jets are going to take
Calvin Pryor.
what's his face from
Yeah,
Louisville,
you
Calvin
wish I was
Pryor, and
wrong.
I'm like, I'm like, who's Calvin Pryor? I didn't even know who he was. I was like,
it's
who?
more Joe.
And I'm
That one
like,
really wasn't anyone telling me. What I try to do is I feel like when you're around these guys, you start to learn how they think, and it's just kind of trying to project how they think, how the GM is going to think about things. And Joe's actually harder to read than some of the other GMs. That you kind of know what they were going to do. Or back when Rex was the coach and Tannenbaum was a GM, I think Rex had a lot of influence over who the picks were, and you always sort of knew who Rex liked.
Oh,
but yeah, it's more just trying to think like them, and that's why. And this one's a fascinating one because it's going to be an interesting decision, whatever happens before them.
Okay, let's go to
I mean,
some
right,
of the hands, Joe. And Brian, I just will tell you, last year, I know you know Joe a long time. When I always tell the story, you never heard it, but when the Jets picked McDonald, he was so angry he broke into Old McDonald, and it was priceless. And I only wish we'd recorded it. All right, let's go to Jason, Steve, and then Tony.
Brian, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for coming on. Obviously, I'm almost just burnt out about all this talk. I mean, we all love the Jets at the end of the day, but I wish the draft was tomorrow. Like,
So do I. So do I. It's silly.
Yeah, it's just crazy. But listen, I ultimately, if I look at this responsibly, I think offensive line should be the pick. I'm all for that. But I also believe that, if we stay there at 10, we should pick the player who's commensurate with the value of the 10th overall pick, right? So whether that's Brock Bowers and listen, I was ripping Joe Douglas, but he did a good job this offseason. I know we were all upset the first couple days, but he did go sign Tyron Smith. He traded for Morgan Moses. He signed Mike Williams, and that's the nice part about this draft, right? Like last year, and Belichick alluded to it today on the Pat McAfee show. A blind person could have told that he wanted to pick Broderick Jones, right? So I think whatever direction they go, you can't get too upset. My question, well, I have 2 questions. The first, comment though I want to make though is if we're all in, right, and this team is healthy and competes and does as well as we think that they're going to do, say Marvin Harrison drops to the Chargers at 5, or you see a guy like Malik Neighbors drop to 7 or 8. Those 2, in my opinion, are so special and talented, right? I mean, you won't have to say it's Neighbors at 8, but say Marvin Harrison is sitting there at the Chargers at 5. And I don't know if this is in Joe Douglas's forte per se, but again, if we win this year and we're picking 25, 26 next year, I'm calling up the Chargers and I'm saying, hey, listen, I'll give you this year's 10 and next year's first round pick for Marvin Harrison. Because honestly, I don't care who they pick next year if they hold on to the pick. Nobody, to me, Marvin Harrison is the most talented player in this entire class. I think that's definitely worth it. And can you imagine him and Wilson on the same offense together? It would just free up everybody and make everybody that much better. It would allow Brees Hall, more ability to run. To me, that's a no-brainer. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that, and whether you think that's a realistic possibility.
Yeah, I wouldn't criticize them if they did that. I think Harrison is the one player you make that argument for because, like a lot of people consider him the number 1 player in this draft overall. So I'm not sure, how highly the Jets have him rated, but they if they think he's that great of a player, you can argue to make that move. And Joe's been aggressive. right? We've seen it with AVT. We saw it with Jermaine Johnson, with Brees. He traded up to get all those guys. So he has moved up. He's held on to his first round picks pretty much. He even ended up doing that with Rodgers. But if they are at a point now where I do think they can be aggressive like that. A few years ago, I probably would have argued against it. I don't think they need to worry so much about next year's pick. And I the only part I disagree with you on is I would never go in thinking, oh, we're going to be picking 26 next year. I think I said this last week with some of you guys. Like, see, that was the criticism after the Jamal Adams trade. It was like, oh, well, the Seattle always wins. So that pick is going to be 28. Well, it ended up being 10. So you don't know. But if you feel like if he has a conviction about a guy, I wouldn't have a problem if he moved up and got them.
I hear you, Brian, but if they struggle this year, or even if they like barely squeak into the playoffs, and I know this sounds crazy because we haven't made the playoffs in 15 years, but if they like are 9-8 and they barely squeak into the playoffs as a wild card, like that's really bad. I mean, this team, like Aaron Rodgers, you'd like to think that the Achilles was a freak injury. I think other than that one year where I think he tore his pec or there was some or his like a collarbone or something.
He broke the
Like
collarbone, had to have surgery.
yeah, like other than that, like he has been pretty healthy throughout his career. Like I do expect this team to be win at least 11 games. I mean, you have to. But my second question, and I'm sure a bunch of other people are going to ask you this. Hell, they might even ask you this after I ask you this. So I apologize, but and again, I know these things are very fluid, but like in your mind, like what direction do you ultimately think? And listen, it depends on how the board follows or drops, right? So we won't know till draft night. But what is your honest take? Not what you think, but like what do you think like the organization is leaning towards? Thank you so much.
So, I think Joe Douglas at his heart is an offensive line, defensive line guy. So I think he's probably leaning offensive line. But I think there's probably a lot of people in his ear going, they need another weapon. I think the coaching staff probably wants.
Would Woody be one of those people?
I think Woody could definitely be one of those people, right? Woody has stepped in the past, and I don't know that he is or he isn't. But I could see a scenario where Woody wants, like, the thing that stood out to me is when Woody talked at NFL Honors and then again at the owners' meetings, right? And he's going offense, offense, offense. Well, in an owner's mind, offense, offense, offense is not a guard or a tackle, right? That's points. that's receivers, or I'll consider Bowers like a receiver. So that to me was kind of like a telling statement from Woody that he wants to see this offense score a lot. And I think if you ask Douglas, he'd probably say the offensive line will help us score a lot of points, but I'm not sure owners see it like that. So, I definitely, I wish I had a crystal ball. I could tell you what's going to happen next Thursday, but I think it's an interesting push and pull here about whether you want another protector or whether you want to go out and get him a playmaker. And I'd be curious to hear what Rodgers thinks too. I mean, if you're Joe Douglas, I think you're talking to Rodgers about this decision as well and seeing what he says. Not that
I think he'll want to bring in Bakhtiari.
I was going to say, I think he knows exactly what Mr. Rogers wants. I have a feeling. Let's go to Steve and then Tony and then the traveling gamer. And again, if you have questions, Brian, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem.
I don't know if Joe touched base with you. Just let us know when it's time for you to leave. We'll cut out 5 minutes.
No problem. Yeah, I'll do it in the car as long as I can. I just gotta drive to my son's basketball game.
Well, I hope he wins. Go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
All right, Kaz, thanks again
problem.
for joining us tonight. Before I get to my question, I'll tease you a little bit. You said a minute ago you've been covering the team for 14 years.
No.
Wait a minute. When was the last time they made the playoffs? And can I interest you in covering the Bills?
I know.
Anyway, like many of us, like you, burnt out from the draft talk.
Yep.
But so instead of next week, let me pivot with my question to 2 weeks from now. What do you think they do with AVT's fifth-year option? Personally, I don't think they're going to pick it up because that's a $20 million guaranteed fifth year.
Well, no, it's less, Steve, because he didn't hit any of the escalators.
It's not much less, though, Paul. I don't think it's less than like 17 or 18.
I thought it was 14 or 15, but I
mean, we could check. Yeah, it's splitting hairs, no worries. But what do you think, Kaz? You think they exercise it or no?
I think they do. Because I think with the AVT injury issue, it's not like he has a chronic knee condition or a chronic shoulder condition. He's had two kind of freakish injuries that you wouldn't expect are going to be long-term issues in my mind. And when he's played, he's shown he's a very good player, very versatile player. So to me, I think they should pick it up. I think they will pick it up, but we'll see. I mean, I that sometimes we'll see if Joe Douglas is going to have a press conference Friday for the pre-draft press conference, and I'm sure he's going to be asked about that again. We'll see see what he says there, or maybe sometimes he'll say it at the end of the draft because that'll be like 3 days before the deadline. So we'll see. I just called up the vera-tucker. The 5th-year option is $15.3 million.
So, Steve, you can say, Paul, you were right again. All right,
yeah.
Tony. Go ahead.
So Penei Sewell, Rashawn Slater, it's $19 million because they made a Pro Bowl.
Yeah, they made the escalators. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, Tony, and then the traveling gamer. Go ahead.
Thanks, boys. How we doing? Hey, Brian. First of all, I want to apologize. I know that the new uniform release didn't give you another fashion show to cover. I know that was the highlight of your career. So I'm sorry it couldn't happen again.
I kept telling people I went to college to cover that night.
Anyway, I just want to get into this idea of a quarterback late. You heard the names Michael Pratt, you heard the name Jordan Travis, you heard like even Milton, but I don't know about that. But anyway, like how important is it, do you think, for this team to bring at least one of those guys in just to start like a kind of an apprenticeship while we still have Rodgers here? Do you think it's important to get one of these guys late because there's going to be the run early and then there's going to be those two hanging around, I know, for a while, but who knows how long? So are they looking at it like, oh my God, we need to get at least one in here, like somebody that's like a developmental like thing, right? Or no?
Yeah, I think they want one. I don't know if it's going to be earlier than like the 7th. It could be the 6th or 7th round. It could be an undrafted guy. I don't think this is the guy they're drafting to be the heir apparent to Rodgers. I think this is more take a flyer on a guy and maybe he becomes Brock Purdy, right? Brock Purdy is now going to be the example everyone uses when they draft a quarterback late. But it's more about like just having a third quarterback and for training camp and develop and like hoping you can develop a guy. I think when you draft a guy that late, the upside you're hoping is for a backup. Like you're hoping you get a Mike White situation and a guy who can be a high level backup for you. I think next year we're going to be talking about, do they draft a quarterback in the first round that can learn under Rodgers for a year? I think that's going to be a heavy conversation next year with this team. So this one more is about just a developmental guy, and maybe you get lightning in a bottle and he becomes something. Most of these guys don't, but I do think they will add a quarterback. It might come out undrafted free agency rather than in the draft, but I do think they have to add a third quarterback.
Ryan, before we go to traveling gamer, there's one question I actually wanted to ask you. I am a big Justin Simmons fan. I also am a big believer that Chuck Clark's a guy. Maybe he's a nice guy, but he's a guy to me. And Tony Adams did not show me enough to have a lot of faith in him. I think that's the weak link of this defense. I think Justin Simmons would be a tremendous difference maker, and he doesn't seem to have much of a market because it's April 17th, and we're talking about him, and he's still on the street. What do you think the Jets... Well, first of all, do you have any information that they've actually looked into that? And because I know he doesn't spend on safety, so I'm curious what your thought process is if you think they're going to add someone to that room with Davis, Clark, and Adams.
I do think they need to add someone. I haven't heard anything about Simmons. I think this is another, like sort of what I said about Mekhi. I think this is a situation where I think teams right now it's all about the draft, right? They're all in draft prep. I think you come out of the draft and on April 28th, you look at your roster and go, okay, what do we still need? And that's when guys like Justin Simmons start to get signed. And we've seen Douglas do this, right? Morgan Moses, version 1.0 was the best example of this, right? Signing him in June. He signed there was somebody that signed late last year. He bought Connor McGovern right before the draft. You remember they re-signed him. So I could see it happening probably right after the draft if they don't draft a safety. but I think they might draft a safety too. I think that I could see that as being a 3rd round pick, 4th round pick as a guy. It's probably not going to be a starter right away, but you could develop. But yeah, the safety market is interesting because it's been completely devalued. It's a position that now, there's some good players that got cut and are out there, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of money going around for them. So
before we go to Gamer, Joe actually had one quick one he wanted to ask you. Then we're going to go to Gamer and Dane and Steve.
Actually, two quickies, Brian. One is any chance of them signing Reddick to a long-term deal before the season, and two, as far as the running back is concerned, I think we talked about it. They need to add a veteran.
Yeah.
Do you see them doing it through like getting a veteran like Ezekiel Elliott, or doing it through the draft and trying to draft someone in a late round?
Similar, Joe. I think they're going to see how the draft goes, and to me, that's a room that could use a veteran more than any. With safety, you have Chuck Clark, who's the veteran presence. They don't really have that. Izzy is really barely played. Brees obviously has established himself as a number 1 running back, but not a veteran guy. So I think they could use a veteran in that room. So I could see if it's Zeke or somebody else coming in after the draft, for sure. What was your other one?
And Reddick. Would you see any?
That was the talk around the trade, was they were probably going to do something with his deal. So, and obviously that's what happened in Philadelphia, was he wanted a deal and they weren't going to pay him. So yeah, I could see something getting done there before the season for sure.
Okay.
Plus, they can save money on the cap. They can just move the money, right? So it makes sense.
They can make his first year of his contract cap friendly, and that's the money there.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to Gamer and then Dane and Steve.
What's your feeling on the Jets picking an offensive lineman for the pick 10? Because I know we had a lot of issues last season with a lot of injured offensive linemen. Like I think we had 4 injured offensive linemen, and I'm hearing I'm not confident with our backup left tackle. I know they're saying he can step in, but I'm not confident with him blocking the best defensive linemen in Cleveland or Baltimore.
I hear you. I mean, they have Carter Warren, obviously. I think that's who you're referring to. But I think a tackle makes sense at 10 for 2 reasons. Number one, the 2 guys that they brought in to play tackle are 33 years old. Both have recent injury histories. And then being they're 33 years old and they're only here on a 1-year contract, you got to start looking at 2025. They're not going to be here. And if you draft somebody at number 10, now you're hoping that guy, he'll probably have to play in 2024, but he'll definitely play in 2025. So I think a tackle makes a lot of sense at number 10. Like I said before, it's going to be interesting, though, whether they feel like they need a playmaker more than a protector.
Okay, Dane and then Steve. Go ahead, Dane.
Hey guys, joining a little late, so I hope you guys haven't already touched on this, but knowing that 90% of our secondary is not signed through 2025, do you feel, Cause, that something or much of it has already been done behind the scenes and just hasn't been announced? That way we can feign the need for long-term secondary help. And then a follow-up would be, what do you if you were the GM, what would you do for CB2 in 2025? Because it's kind of a divisive topic, and there's 4 different routes we can take with Reed. I know what I want to do, but
Yeah, I think DJ Reed has been fantastic since he's been with the Jets. I think that is probably Joe's best signing. I'm trying to think if there's another free agent signing that I would put higher. I think that's probably number 1. So to me, yeah, I'd be working on an extension for DJ, and I'm sure there's been talks. I don't know if anything. I doubt anything's done, but that's the way I would go. And I think cornerback too is a sneaky little need for this team in terms of depth. So I'd probably be drafting guys that I would hope might be able to develop for 2025. And then, with Sauce, I'd be locking him up the first minute I could next year, because you saw what the Eagles are doing. I think the Jets need to do that. They didn't do it with Bryce Huff. They need to be more proactive with these guys, getting them signed early. So I would be all over Sauce as soon as I could.
Okay, Joe, go ahead. I'm sorry, Steve, Joe, Steve, and then Joe.
No,
Steve's
it's
our
okay,
co-host.
Paul. Go to Joe. I asked a question already. Go ahead.
Well, okay, Joe, and then Steve. Go ahead, Joe.
Hey guys, how you doing? With it being about 2.5 weeks out, Brian,
Yep.
you believe that the Jets are going to have as many primetime games as they did last year, or do you see us having, like that 1 o'clock cupcake game on a Sunday?
No, I think they will have as many primetime games as they did. I think the Aaron Rodgers appeal is still there. I think the expectations will be that this will be a good team. Their schedule, I have to kind of look at their schedule more. And I haven't thought about it in terms of that, but there's enough teams there where I think they would put them in prime time. So I still think they're going to be. I don't think they're back to the 1 o'clock schedule that I preferred. That was good for deadline writing, but I think there'll be plenty of night games.
Brian, when you have an hour and 45-minute ride each way, the 1 o'clock games are nice too.
Yeah.
Trust me.
Hey, Brian, you think they get that Black Friday game? I know Woody's been petitioning for that to the league. I mean, you think there's any chance they get that game?
I don't think so. There was talk of them wanting to be sort of like what Detroit and Dallas are for Thanksgiving and having that game every year. I don't see why the NFL would agree to that.
I think Brian might have gone.
A lot of years the lines are terrible,
and
that game hasn't been attractive. So I don't see why the NFL would lock into that Black Friday for the Jets every year.
Okay, Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, so it kind of circles back to what Tony asked before. I mean, it's not as much a priority as worrying about Morgan Moses and Tyron Smith, but we've got our starting quarterback that hope to God plays at a high level and healthy for 17 games, because it's not like Tyrod Taylor has been the bastion of health in his career either.
Yeah.
So I do think a third quarterback, and we know it's not going to be Zach, is important. I don't really see them spending a 4th-round pick on Travis and non-football injury him for most of the season, or Michael Pratt, Tulane. Maybe it's the end of the 7th round, or the undrafted, a guy like Devin Leary out of Kentucky who's got, Rodgers sort of size. But throw a hypothetical, maybe not going into next weekend with the draft, maybe closer to training camp. Cleveland right now is sitting with 4 quarterbacks. They've got Deshaun Watson, Jameis Winston backing him up. They picked up Tyler Huntley from the Ravens, who did a very good job at times, when Lamar was out. And they got the guy they drafted last year in Dorian Thompson-Robinson, DTR. What do you think about throwing a 2025 pick at the Browns as we get closer to training camp for DTR, a guy that Rodgers knows and likes?
I hear you. I think I probably wouldn't. I wouldn't trade a pick for your number 3 quarterback. I think most teams are screwed if they're playing the third quarterback, and I think if it gets to that situation with the Jets, they're probably signing someone during the season. And I hate the guys bring it back last year, but I think it's a situation similar to last year where you're looking at the Trevor Simeons of the world, or obviously Flacco worked out very well for the Browns, but those kind of guys who are on the street and who's out there and you can sign, if it gets to that point, I would be surprised if they gave up a draft pick for a number 3 quarterback. I think if they're playing the third quarterback, they're probably in trouble. I think they're just going to be crossing their fingers that number 8 stays healthy this year.
Brian, Petey, go ahead. Petey, go ahead.
Hey, Brian, how are you, Kaz?
Good. How you doing?
Kaz, real quick. So I'm playing the fear factor here. Do you think the Jets, because I think they should play Rodgers, but do you think they hold a Tyron Smith and Tyrod Taylor back afraid of injury, or do you have to play? I know they're going to have get reps. As I'm looking ahead, Brian, obviously this draft.
You talking about training camp,
yes.
Pete? I think in training camp, I think Rodgers will be full go. I think Tyron Smith will be on a pitch count.
Yeah, for games, do you think they'll sit out? I think Rodgers will play in the games, but do you think a Taylor?
Preseason? You talking about preseason games? No, I don't think they'll play. I think maybe Rodgers would play like a series or in the like third game or two series like he did last
Okay.
year. But I think they'll be very careful.
Same with
And,
Smith.
I think the offensive line is going to be a situation like last year where there's not going to be much time for these guys to gel because I think Tyron Smith will be on a watch. I think AVT, who knows how much he'll be able to do, and Morgan Moses coming off pec surgery. I don't know how much those guys are going to be able to play together in training camp, which was sort of what happened. One of the problems last year going into the season. So with Wayne Brown so I do think I don't think they'll be playing in games though, Pete.
I'll tell you,
Okay.
Kaz.
There'll be joint practices that they'll do. They'll participate in joint practices. Those are almost have replaced preseason games for the veterans.
I'll tell you, Kaz,
Brian,
though, I think it's a good thing, even though they don't play next to each other, that you've got both Morgan Moses and Simpson played together on the line at Baltimore, and obviously AVT and Morgan know each other. So I think that's pretty important.
Yeah, and I think it's just good to get Ravens DNA in the building. Personally, like that's a great organization. Obviously, they win a lot, so I think it's always good to have people from winning organizations come join the team. It helps in the locker room, and Morgan was a great guy when he was here in 21. I don't know Simpson very well, but I know some people who cover the Ravens who've talked highly of him. So I think those will be good guys in the locker room to have.
Brian, the one question I also wanted to address with you is that people, I think, naively think Tyrone Smith is going to play a full season just because he's been a great player. I could hope the Jets are not among those naive people. I mean, look, he's 33 years old. He's got a chronic back injury, and he's played 10 games. He's averaged 10 games a year for 4 years. I think that is the impetus if they do draft a lineman. And people will melt down, including my friend Joe up here, if they draft an offensive tackle at 10. Because people say you're drafting a backup. I personally don't think your backup playing 4 to 6 games, protecting your 40-year-old quarterback is a backup. I think he's a pretty important player. What have you heard about the Jets' expectations for Smith in terms of how much they think they can get out of him?
Yeah, they're not going to admit like what they think, but I think they're realistic. They know he's 33 years old. They know his injury history. I mean, look at the contract they gave him. That's what I would say, right? That contract is all about playing time. So if he plays a lot, he makes a lot. If he doesn't play a lot, the Jets are pretty much protected. If the Jets thought he was going to play 17 games, they would pay him like he's playing 17 games. They're paying him. It's pay as you play almost, that contract. So that tells you what they're really thinking. And I'm with you. I definitely think offensive tackle makes a lot of sense here because like today's luxury is tomorrow's necessity. And we've seen, and it wasn't just last year, it's been like every year in recent years where they go through a ton of offensive linemen, and not just the Jets, it's all across the league. These injuries are happening. And, I personally think these practices are a lot easier. And I think the one position that hurts is offensive linemen because I think they almost need to build up a resistance to hitting, and they need to hit, and the term they always use is calloused. They need to get calloused, and it doesn't really happen anymore because the spring, there's nothing in the spring really for like the offensive linemen barely participate in OTAs. Those are like passing camps now, and even training camp practices are pretty much light. Like when I first started, they always did goal line drills, and it was full hitting. If you guys remember the Hard Knocks from the first Hard Knocks, 2010, with like Mangold and Chris Jenkins going against each other on the goal line, like that doesn't exist anymore in training camp. So to me, the more offensive linemen you have, the better. It's almost like pitchers in baseball. I don't think you can have enough good ones. So I fully support the camp of drafted offensive tackle.
Brian, well, I agree with you, which is why I'm glad you said that. But I'm old enough to have seen when I was young Dick Vermeil's training camps at Widener University when he first got to the Eagles. They were 3 a days, and they hit for hours. It was like watching that book, The Junction Boys, what Bear Bryant did to those guys.
Yeah.
It was like that, only on the professional level. But let's go to some more hands because we thank you for your time. Just let us know when you got to run. We're going to go with Sean and then Terrence.
Hey, Paul. Thanks, Brian. Quick question. Not to push back on what Paul said, but I'm not one of those fans who thinks Smith is not going to get hurt or play or not play all 17 games. I'm hoping we get to a point with this franchise where we could just draft the best player available, because that's what Douglas has been doing since he's been here. So to me, look, do we need a line? Am I pro lineman? Yeah, but am I going to go crazy if they take a Brock Bowers or a Roma Doomsday? No. From what you've, I guess, known or what you've seen, is it pretty much, yeah, the best player may be Odunze or Bowers, but if we're at 10 and nobody wants to trade down with us, are they taking you're 100%? They're taking an O lineman?
No, not 100%. No. I like I said before too. I think knowing Joe Douglas, I think he'd like to take an offensive lineman. But I do think there's going to be coaches that lobby for a receiver, and I include Bowers in that when I say receiver, but a pass catcher, and the owner looms large here, guys. Like he's gonna have a say. It's his team, and he might tell him he wants a pass catcher. Like I said before, he keeps talking about offense, and in my mind, when Woody says offense, he's not saying tackle. He's
Right.
talking
And
about
you know what?
guys who are going to score touchdowns. So I could see him tipping the scales toward a pass catcher. But I do think it does depend. Is it the fourth pass catcher versus the second offensive lineman? Is it the third offensive lineman versus the third pass catcher? I do think there's going to be an equation here that they have to consider, and there's a lot to be determined in the 9 picks before that.
I'm with you. And to me, if one of those receivers are there at 10, I'm taking him over a lineman. And like you said, that comment, that Woody Johnson comment, that's not being talked about enough. People want to just brush it aside. But when he came out and said that, to me, that didn't speak to O-line play at all.
No, I agree with
thanks,
you.
Brian.
Yep.
And Brian, we don't know what they think of Brock Bowers. They may love Brock. I mean, if they talk and say, look at a guy like Kelsey, and we saw with what's his name last year, Laporta, and we saw with Kincaid. I mean, these guys were impactful guys, as a rookie. I mean,
but the flip side of that, Joe, is Pitts, right? Pitts was taken number 4 overall in Atlanta. He hasn't had the impact of a number 4 player.
He hasn't had the quarterback either, really, except for this first year when he had.
Yeah, he had Matt Ryan. Yeah, no, you're right, but it's. I would argue though that position, tight end. There's hardly any good tight ends that don't have a good quarterback, right? That's a position that gets elevated by playing with a good quarterback. If we start rattling off the list of the best tight ends, they usually have a good quarterback. And but Bowers is a little different. I'm curious. He didn't run a 40, and that's interesting to me that he didn't run the 40. I wonder what Douglas thinks of that.
Well, he was a 4.5. He ran a 4.5. I guess that's what it was before. I know he did run it.
I don't know when he ran that though, Joe. He didn't
run at the combine. He didn't run at the pro day.
You watch.
It's like a mystery how fast he is. And
I know, but you watch tape with him though, Brian. I mean,
his tape.
Such a mismatch.
Tape speaks for itself.
Brian, guess where Joe wants to go with the draft pick? Do you have any clue at this point? Terrence, go ahead.
That 40 was 2019.
Oh, really?
Right.
2019?
But I wonder.
You don't really run the 40 when you're in college, so it's probably high school.
Nike Sparks.
Go ahead, Terrence.
Yeah. Brian, thanks a lot, guys. Brian, good to talk to you. I'm glad you survived the carnage after your mock draft was posted last week. And my question, a general question, is we all know that if this doesn't work out this year, that Douglas and Saleh are likely to be gone. So if Douglas feels that he likes, let's just use the wide receivers right now. We could also use it for alt. But if Douglas felt like he had to move up in order to get the guy that he covets, would Woody Johnson be willing to part with a second-round pick next year, knowing that very likely a new regime would be without that second round pick next year if everything turns
Yeah,
bad. To get like Alt at 6 or Odunze at 6 because they're worried that's the guy. That's a couple of the guys they want, but that they fear they
right.
won't be there at 10.
Yeah, I think Woody's all in for this year. I think he would be fine with that. I don't think he's going to be worried about next year at all. I think Woody is desperate to win, and so I think he would, if that's what Douglas wanted to do, I think he would do it. I mean, like throwing crazy money around in free agency, I don't think Woody was going to do that this year. But I think trading a pick, he'd be okay with that, and he wouldn't be worried about the next guy not having the pick. They'll deal with next year if they have to do that. I think in Woody's mind, it's all in for this season, and trying to end the playoff drought.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. I don't know if Paul can speak. He's having some tech. We got our founding father in the room, live on vacation. Ray.
Brian, my man, my question to you is, and I'm coming in late, how, there's a lot of talk of the Jets actually moving down because they don't have a second round pick.
Yeah.
How comfortable are you moving down? Like, how far? Like, would you be willing to drop all the way to the 20s to recoup a 2 and a 3? Or are you like, we still need, if you're not going to go after one of the high end tackles, because maybe not everybody has Fashanu as a great tackle. Maybe he's graded in the teens somewhere, and you don't feel comfortable taking him at 10. What risk are you willing to take to regain the assets that we lost to Aaron Rodgers trade?
Yeah, I did in my mock draft today. I went down to 20 with the Steelers, and I used the PFF tool, and I got a second round pick, and I got a second round next year, and I gave them the 10. I got Alan Lazard in the trade, so that PFF simulator is fun. I gave the Steelers Lazard, but yeah, I think you can move back to 20. I wouldn't go past. I wouldn't go past there, but
Who are
if
you
you look at
targeting
it.
there?
I took Fashanu there. Not Fashanu. I took the Washington tackle there. He was there, the guard, the guard tackle from Washington.
Troy
He was there. Fatanu. I was like Fashanu and Fatanu. I can't get straight in my head.
Think Seattle
I took Fatanu there.
I think Seattle is going to grab him though at 16.
But so he was there, so I took him. But I think you can go back that far. But it's they what I've heard is they're good with where they're at with the third round pick. They feel like they can get 2 starters in this draft, but I don't know. Getting that second round pick feels good to me. To address whatever you don't address at 10 in terms of if you take a tackle, take a receiver, then the second round feels like you're getting a lot better one than wait until the third round or vice versa. But I think they can move back in deep into the teens or even to 20. So I am just arriving at my son's basketball game.
Well, Brian, thank you.
But I appreciate you
Let
guys.
me thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
My family's in the car listening here, and
well, tell your family
they thank you guys, right? I always tell them.
Thanks again, Brian.
These are the people.
The best.
These are the people that pay my salary. I appreciate you guys. All right.
You're the best,
Thanks,
Brian.
Kaz.
Thanks, buddy, for coming in.
All right, guys. Have a
Good
good
luck
night.
at the game.
Talk to you later. Good luck tonight.